This afternoon's first speaker is Karen Mamo, who will update us on the state of cannabis regulation in Malta. Karen has a broad academic background, including masters in addiction studies and conflict resolution in Mediterranean security. Her work focuses on establishing an evidence-based approach to cannabis use in society, and she leads the effort to establish a regulatory framework establishing cannabis harm reduction associations in Malta. Welcome to the stage, Karen Mamo.
Hello, good afternoon. It's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, especially since Malta, I hope you know where Malta is, but Malta is a very tiny island in the Mediterranean and has been historically linked with very conservative drug policies. However, as I will hope to be explaining today, this has changed in 2015 and 2021. So, exactly updates from regulation in Malta, focusing on not-for-profit. A general overview of what I will be talking about today. I will be giving a general overview about cannabis use in Malta, and then move on the legislative changes, both for personal use, but also for the collective cultivation and availability of cannabis. Before I continue, a brief historical snippet. So, being a Mediterranean country and very close to North Africa, such as Libya and Tunisia, historically, cannabis arriving in Malta was arriving in hash form, and the THC levels were usually not higher than 11%. However, when the Arab Spring broke out in late 2010-11, the market shifted so much so that hash suddenly stopped arriving in the island, and drug organizations started to import flower form cannabis from mainland Europe, mainly from Sicily, Albania, which were cannabis of very bad quality, but then it shifted to also the Netherlands and Spain, predominantly coming via water, because as an island, the airspace is more difficult to smuggle this type of drugs. So, how many people do exactly use cannabis in Malta? Unfortunately, general population survey, the most recent one dates back to 2013 and shows that 4.3% of the Maltese population, which I might say is around 500,000, use cannabis on a regular basis and can be considered as lifetime cannabis users. More recent data from 2021 shows that alcohol and tobacco obviously have higher levels of use. However, I wanted to include this because these are the three most predominantly used drugs in Malta, and apart from cocaine, which is now increasing its use. But I wanted to show this percentage to give a better idea about prevalence use, but also the levels of incarceration. In fact, unfortunately, even recent data shows that the majority of cases are for possession charges, whereas it is only 25 who are related to trafficking. And interestingly enough, also most drug law offenses are related to cannabis possession or trafficking. So, unlike what the media has said a lot, Malta has not, and I underline, has not legalized cannabis, so much so that the original law dating from 1939, the Dangerous Drugs Ordinance, is still there, and cannabis is still listed under the so-called narcotics law. However, in 2021, the Maltese Parliament enacted a legislation to further move from a depenalized to a decriminalized system. I'm saying this because back in 2015, the initial amendment to the law called Drug Dependence Treatment Not Imprisonment allowed or permitted or tolerated, let's call it like that, the possession of small amounts of drugs under a depenalized model whereby the police still retained the right to confiscate the drug, the right to arrest the person and interrogate, and then, however, the person did not end up with a criminal record but was diverted to a commissioner of justice whereby and then issued a fine. And this has promoted a relative paradigm shift how society should view personal drug use. So cannabis, the partial decriminalization of cannabis, builds a bit on this experiment to shift personal users from a predominantly criminal bracket towards a less harsh approach. So in 2021, we see that laws related to cannabis are a mix of a depenalization, decriminalization, criminalization, as I will explain, and regulation. So under cannabis for personal use, one finds that the law now tolerates and permits the possession of up to 7 grams. And this falls directly under a decriminalized model whereby possession of 7 grams of cannabis in flower form will not result in any consequences. So the police will not arrest the person, will not confiscate cannabis. However, if there is suspicion of trafficking, for example, if the 7 grams are divided in 7 small packets, then obviously the police will consider that as a trafficking, and then the criminal provisions kick in. The law in 2021 also tolerates the cultivation of 4 cannabis plants per household. And this provision was included whereby it was noticed that if only possession is allowed, then the illicit market will continue to monopolize and manipulate cannabis users, particularly people who use cannabis on a daily basis. The alternatives to incarceration, as I explained before, is an interesting approach whereby under a depenalized model, people caught with more than 7 grams but less than 28 will be once more diverted to the Commissioner of Justice and spared a tainted criminal record. Under personal use, one also finds provisions falling under social justice, whereby the expungement of criminal record was included. Although I might say this is not automatic, and one hopes that hopefully in the future the legislator will see the need to move to an automatic expungement of criminal records. We move now to the collective cultivation and distribution of cannabis. Something which I did not mention before is the role of civil society in influencing the legislator in moving towards a more communal and not-for-profit approach than to a dispensary model as we see in predominantly American states. So these cannabis harm reduction associations have as their primary aim a not-for-profit basis and a selfless approach to cultivate and distribute cannabis to a restricted group of members. In fact, only registered members will be allowed to access these associations, and members can only be members of one club at a time. Importantly, these associations have also to test their cannabis flowers, something which the illicit market, unfortunately, is not possible to do even for personal users because there are no testing facilities in Malta. These associations, unlike other industries or associations involved in commodities, will not be allowed to market their operations or affix any signage outside of their distribution centers. Very interestingly, and also thanks to work like, for example, ENCOD, I was very pleased to see that ENCOD was mentioned even earlier. The democratic participation of members who will be registered members is important to further ensure that the association moves in favor of the users and not the industry. And again, the idea to prioritize public health and the role of the authority together with cannabis harm reduction associations to promote a harm reduction approach. Apart from establishing these associations, the authority is also filling a vacuum when it comes to education on drugs. The government entity SETA, who is focused on prevention and treatment, has been focusing on prevention and treatment, and unfortunately a harm reduction approach and educational approach to better promote a responsible use of cannabis has been lacking for a long time in Malta. And the authority, also thanks to social media and other educational platforms, is trying to promote a better understanding of what the law permits, but also some tips how to reduce harm and risks associated with cannabis. Interestingly, also, these associations, although accepting people from the age of 18, will have a limit of 15% THC for people under the age of 21. This has been included to impart in young cannabis users a more conscious approach when it comes to THC limits, levels, and how this impacts well-being. Something which I did not mention is that these associations will only be allowed to distribute cannabis in flower form, and therefore extracts and high-potency THC products, for now at least, have not been included. The associations will also go through harm reduction training, which I am pleased to know that it will start in November, and will be encouraged to impart between their members non-judgmental information and organize activities based on harm reduction. So the main aim of these associations is to further provide a safe space where people who use cannabis can access cannabis, which is tested, but also can access educational tools to further reduce the risks associated with maybe bad practices used to consume cannabis. I will make a side note here, which is linked to the safe space and to the cannabis social club model maybe we see in Spain and in other countries. Unfortunately, and I say this with a heavy heart, albeit I'm part of the authority, that there will be no consumption on-site these associations. And from a harm reduction approach, I believe that this is a missed opportunity to allow consumption on-site, especially if we want to really impart a harm reduction approach. However, it is important to note that there are discussions ongoing also to allow the consumption on-site these associations. Recently, I have also been informed that there are 6 associations who have been granted the in-principle license, and therefore, although not operational yet, they have been granted a legal status to start buying the equipment, renting out the cultivation area, and also having an opportunity for the authority to inspect and audit these associations. Hopefully one will see these associations in operation in the first quarter of 2024. So to conclude, today I spoke a bit about decriminalization and regulation, and I really hope that I explained the distinction, because the effects on cannabis users are pretty much different from a depenalized to a decriminalized to a regulated model. And I have also looked a bit about prevalence and incarceration, particularly the fact that a change in the law has improved the number of people ending up with a tainted criminal record. Although we have also seen that 75% of drug-related offenses continue to be for possession charges. So we see that sometimes the law is in a way pulling in different polarities. However, it is very admirable to see that thousands of people have had their criminal record spared from being tainted just for their cannabis possession and use. And I also spoke about the role of public health and harm reduction being, I believe, the pinnacle of how these associations should work, especially to move away as much as possible from possible corporate capture and a new industry which has no interest to protect the well-being of the users, but only as a profit-driven approach. So that was my presentation for today. Thank you, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Something I did not mention is I brought with me few copies of some publications from the authority, but also the National Drug Policy for Malta and the drug situation in Malta of 2022. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. We have a couple of questions.
Yes, I have a question. I cannot leave.
Yeah. So, first question, how is the cannabis regulation viewed by the public in Malta?
So, I believe there were mixed, especially during the discussion before the law was enacted. The discussion was somewhat polarized, so you had civil society calling for a more humane approach, whereas most stakeholder partners calling for a criminalized, or at least the situation remains as it is. And the population, I believe, understood how important it is for people to steer away from cannabis, which could be tainted from the illicit market, but most importantly, having their police conduct not tainted because of their cannabis use. In fact, we had horrible cases. For example, we had a person with a kidney replacement taken to prison, losing the kidney just for 167 grams of cannabis. We had a Welsh person arrested for 10 years for about, if I'm not mistaken, 9 plants. So these horrible stories, these are just 2 of the hundreds of people who had their lives broken down, because then you have a court case, it takes years, then maybe you have a suspended sentence, in the meantime you lost your job, maybe even your family has kicked you out of the house. So I believe these stories and this reality has, in a way, opened the people's mind that although we're not promoting drug use here and we're in any way trying to encourage cannabis use, the law is trying to protect and correct the wrongdoings of the past.
Great. Yeah.
Thanks.
Are there any plans in place for evaluating how well the new system is working?
I believe so, yes. It would be later on, as I've said, these associations have not yet started operating, so the evaluation will be later on in 2024.